I want to welcome everyone this evening to our two-part webinar series on manifestation determination review. I am Tina Norris, and I'm the Family Engagement Specialist here at PC. We are thrilled that you have joined us this evening for such an important topic. If you missed part one, don't worry, we had it recorded and we will share it with all participants after we have completed the closed captioning. We will be utilizing the chat feature throughout the presentation. This evening's session is going to be interactive, so we are asking for your participation. Tonight's session will be on how to prepare for and represent your child in an MDR hearing. And at this time, I would like to introduce our facilitator. Valerie Slater is a juvenile justice attorney who leads the Rise for Youth organization and advocates for the rights of youth involved in the many Virginia systems. Valerie has also worked to protect the rights of children with disabilities in community, residential, and juvenile justice facilities throughout the Commonwealth. She earned her undergraduate degree at the Colorado State University and her Juris Doctor from the University of Richmond School of Law. Valerie has dedicated her life's work to advocacy in its many forms to preserve and protect our most valuable resource, our youth. And at this time, I will welcome Valerie to the forefront.
Thank you so much, Tina. I'm very excited to be back with you all this evening. And yes, as Tina shared, tonight we're going to be talking about how do you prepare for and how do you represent your child during an MDR or a manifestation determination review hearing. And just a little bit about RISE for Youth. RISE stands for Reinvest in Supportive Environments. And we believe that every environment that touches a young person's life ought to be preparing that young person for success, ought to be encouraging that young person to dream, and then preparing the way and helping that young person to fulfill those dreams. And so it is with great honor that I am able now to facilitate this conversation about preparing for and representing your child in a manifestation determination review hearing. So let's get started. We're going to let's do first just a quick agenda. We're going to do a quick review of some of the things that we discussed last evening. And then we're going to talk about what it's all about, right? It all begins with behavior. And then what does notice look like, both to the parent, and then if the parent has some things that the parent wants to make the school aware of. And then we've got to review our students' record and get them in order. And who will you bring to support you, to support your student during that MDR hearing? And then we're going to take some time to do some practice. I've got some scenarios set up, and it's all focused around one particular student. And we're just going to walk through some scenarios and see if we can't come to the best solutions or some very positive forward movement on behalf of the student. And then we'll go over once again what it looks like if we don't agree with the school division's outcome or that MDR team, when we get to an outcome, if we don't agree as parents. And so then a quick review then of everything that we've discussed and a quick conclusion. So let's get started. So for review, what is an MDR? What is that manifestation determination review hearing? Well, it's a process to determine the educational placement of a child who has a known or who is suspected of having a disability. And there is disciplinary action that is proposed that would result in a cumulative disciplinary removal of more than 10 days. So it can be 10 days and 3 hours. It's got to be more than 10 days. Now, this process, it applies both to students who are served under IDEA and students who are served under the Section 504. And let's see, we'll go on. So why are we conducting MDRs? Well, it was honing the the Department of Education in 1988 that decided that we cannot change a student's educational placement or remove them from school for behaviors that stem from their disabilities. So the purpose of the MDR is for all relevant parties, the parents, the local educational agency, the teachers, other members of the IEP team, to come together to determine whether or not a particular behavior is indeed a manifestation of a student's disability. So that process, remember, we're going to start that there has been some sort of a disciplinary infraction of that student code of conduct. The school is attempting to remove the student from that regular learning environment for more than 10 days. There has to be an MDR hearing at that point. The school division has got to put the parents on notice. And once that MDR meeting is held, then there is either the placement is maintained or it's changed based on whether or not there is a determination that it is or is not a manifestation of that child's disability. A parent has the right to appeal. A student is going to stay in their current placement until the conclusion of that appeal, that primary appeal. Whatever the outcome of appeal number one during that due process hearing, that becomes the new stay put if a parent decides that they are going to appeal all the way up to this the circuit court. And you could take it further, but we'll just leave it there. Now, when is disciplinary action considered a change of placement? Again, it's for more than 10 days or a pattern of exclusions that will total more than 10 days if that pattern is established because the behavior is similar or similar to what has been occurring. So this same behavior keeps happening again and again, or there are other additional factors that the school that we are able to review and recognize that it is a particular behavior or even particular antecedent that is leading to the student behaving in such a way that is resulting in cumulative removals that would equal more than 10 days. Now, if a student has not been determined eligible for special education services, they will still have access to this MDR process if the school had knowledge that this is a child who potentially has a disability. And there are 3 ways in which that happens. The parent has either expressed to the school division that in writing. Remember yesterday I said, if it's not in writing, it may as well not have happened. We don't want to leave it to the memories of anyone. We want to make sure that everything we do it in writing, and that we are letting the LEA know that we believe our student may have a disability. Or a parent has requested an evaluation, or the teacher or another member of the LEA has raised concern about the student and their need for particular special education services. So now let's get to it. It all begins with behavior, right? So once a local educational agency has provided services to a student that or is providing services to a student who has a disability, then that and it is notified by a parent of behaviors that need to be addressed, or this student is exhibiting behaviors that are impeding their learning or the learning of other students, then the school is on notice that, and they have an obligation to evaluate that student's behavior needs. So understanding that as soon as a parent says, hey, my child, I've been noticing some behaviors that need to be addressed, or the school, someone in the school, the teacher, maybe the counselor or someone, if they have raised this concern, then the LEA, that local educational agency, they are now on notice and have an obligation to support that child. So when a behavior of a student with a disability, if it violates the provision of a code of conduct, and now the school is attempting to remove the student or contemplating removing the student for 10 days or more, there's something that has to happen, right? There's several things. There's got to be prior written notice that the school is contemplating this removal. The school's got to provide a copy of the procedural safeguards. And now that prior written notice, it also must be given not later than the date the decision to suspend that child for more than 10 days or a long-term removal. As soon as you've made that decision, or as soon as the LEA has made that decision, it is time to give the parent notice. And that notice must also state that the IEP team is going to now conduct a manifestation determination review. So what that says to the parents now is it's time for you to get your students' records in order. I encourage every parent to have a complete copy of your student's educational file. I cannot iterate that enough. I can't say it enough. And the things that should be included in that file, every single notification that you have made to the school regarding your student and all of their diagnoses, right? Everything that is going on with your child that is going to need support, and some things that could just be contributing factors to their need for support. It may not be the underlying, but if it in any way is a contributing diagnosis, you make sure that the school is made aware. So again, if they're receiving support for it, and or if it is one of those that may be contributing, you also need to have copies of every request for evaluations for your students, all requests for support, because sometimes you may have said to the school division, I know that this works at home. May we please institute this at school? You need to make those requests in writing, and you make sure that there is a copy of them in your student's file. You want a copy of every response that the school has made to every request that you've made, and you want to make sure that it is in the form of a prior written notice. The reason that prior written notice is so important is because they become not just a part of your student's cumulative file, it also becomes a part even of the IEP or the 504 plan, whatever instrument is being used to provide service to your student. Those prior written notices become a part of it. And then you need a list of every evaluation that's been conducted. Those are evaluations that have been conducted by the school, or if you have asked for independent evaluations, or if there are evaluations that are just happening outside of the school because you are making sure that your student, your child, is getting the best care possible, is able to access education and learning to the best degree possible. Now, the school is required to provide a free and appropriate education, but you as a parent, you're making sure that your child is able to access that free and appropriate education. And so evaluations may be happening outside of the school, and you need to make sure that you are every evaluation that happens, you give a copy of it to the school division so that that is a robust record. And again, you're making sure that you've got a copy of it as well. You need a copy of every IEP and 504 plan. You need every addendum. You need every update. You need every time something happens with your child's, their special education services, you make sure, number one, that it's documented and whichever instrument is being used, but then you make sure that you also have a copy of it. You also want a complete behavior history for your child. You want to make sure that you are also talking about the different behaviors that you are witnessing at home and asking if they are manifesting in the school environment. And perhaps if they are not, you will be able to determine what are some antecedents, what are some triggers that might be leading to behaviors. And if they do then begin to manifest in the school environment, you will be able to say, well, these are the things that lead up to it. These are the ways that I am able to help my child find their way back from. You also want a complete copy of your child's discipline history. Now, you want that because when you get to that MDR hearing, you're going to be reviewing all of these pertinent pieces of information, and you want it to be complete in your file. So as you are preparing, you know how best to support the needs of your child. You want, again, all outside evaluations and the accompanying reports that have come from those evaluations, the recommendations that have been made by those outside providers as well. And you want every request has been made by an outside provider for particular supports that have been identified as useful and helpful for your student. Now, let's see. You've got to be prepared. And you've got to be ready to point out every instance of behavior and its correlation to your student's disability, right? You don't want the school to try to separate the two as if, well, we know we're providing services for this disability, and now we're having to address these behaviors. No. More often than not, it is the disability itself that is the underlying cause, right? It's the reason that your child is looking for a way, your student is looking for a way to get their particular needs met. And perhaps they don't yet have the tools in their little toolboxes so that they are able to voice or appropriately demonstrate what it is that they're needing. So you want every instance of a behavior and its correlation to your student's disability. You want every request you have ever made for a behavior to be addressed by the school. You don't want it to appear as if, well, out of the blue, here come these behaviors, right? And then you also want every antecedent behavior. Is there a pattern where, a particular student is overstimulated or whatever, or what have you, and then that student begins to behave in a particular manner that is reflective of, I was overstimulated, or I was unable to manage or regulate my emotions. And so now here is this behavior. You want the interventions that have been put into place. And you want to know how effective those interventions have been, but you want it documented in your student's record. And so what it takes is we, the parent, we have got to be very diligent about understanding what our children, what their behaviors are, what the particular interventions are, and the effectiveness of them. And then following up to say, hey, I need you to change a particular intervention because it is not yielding the wanted result. Or yes, let's continue to do this, and let's add this. Because we need to make sure that we are very clear with the school division, with our student, and that we have a clear understanding about the best ways to support our student. And then we need the information from outside providers regarding behaviors as well. Because if you are continuing to see a particular behavior, you aren't just going to trust the school to address it, right? If there are outside providers that you have been working with, you're going to bring them to bear on it as well. So you're going to want to have every suggestion made by the counselors or the therapists or the other professionals who are also working with you and your student. You want their suggestions, you want their information to also be documented in your student's record. And then as you have all of this information, that's how you know you are ready to organize that information. You need to organize your student's file in such a way that you're going to be able to tell the complete story of your student and all that they have experienced in their educational journey, right? You want the first mention of a particular behavior. You want the outcomes of those behaviors. The first request for support. Did it come from the school? Did it come from you? Was that request honored, right? And then again, were the supports put in place? And then how effective were those supports, if there were any? Were your students, were their needs addressed through a functional behavioral assessment when you brought up those first requests? Because remember, the law says when a behavior impedes a student's access to the learning environment, or it impedes the learning environment of others, then the school division has got to put into place the supports necessary for that student to be able to access learning. That's what the law says. So We also need to know, what were the subsequent behavioral incidents? Were there any? And then, were there further requests for support? Again, was that functional behavioral assessment done? Is there a behavioral intervention plan? Has it been reviewed? Because I'm going to tell you, if you have done that functional behavioral assessment and a behavioral intervention plan has been put into place, but it's not working, what good is it? It's not about checking boxes. It's about access to learning. It's not about catching, that student in a behavior. It's not about parents being able to help their students get over on the school. It's about students being able to access their learning. So, being prepared. Remember, these are the two questions that are going to be asked. Was the behavior caused by or directly and substantially related to your student's disability? Or was the behavior the direct result of the school division's failure to implement the student's IEP? Those are the two questions that are going to be answered, right? So the language is important because, again, the Code of Virginia, it requires school divisions to address behaviors before an incident occurs. So if you are able to look through your student's record, you're able to document, you're able to point to the documentation that you have time and again asked for your student to be supported in different ways, and your student has not been supported, and behaviors begin to manifest, then whose fault is that, right? Who didn't do what they needed to do? If you have asked and it has not been, your ask has not been granted, or your requests for supports have not been put into place, then the school division would be on the hook for then putting some supports into place. And it also means that during even the evaluation process, from the very beginning of your child being identified as a student who will need supports through an IEP or through a 504 plan, through the evaluation process, through the eligibility process, through the structuring of that IEP or that 504 plan, the school has got to be considering every support necessary to ensure behavior does not impede your students' access to learning. And remember, who should be at that IEP meeting, right? We, of course, are going to have a representative from the LEA, from that local education agency, and from the administration, right? We'll have a principal or some administrative person. It could even be the head of special education for your particular school division. The parent, you've got to be there. Other relevant members of the IEP team, again, school administrations, special education teachers, a general ed teacher, and any individual who is able to interpret any evaluations that have been done for your student, right? So the school psychologist might be that person. And then there are some recommended folks, but I want to get to who you should invite, right? You, of course, the parent, you're going to be there. Is the other parent available? Might they be able to come? If you are, whether you are in a two-parent household or a single-parent household, if that other parent is spending time with that student, then they're going to have relevant information about your child's ability to access learning and the behaviors that might impede it. And then once you find out from that prior written notice who the local educational agency is going to be inviting, you might want to request other folks, right? So what if they have invited, a teacher that perhaps only spends a minimal amount of time with your student? It may be convenient for them, but you're not looking for convenience. You're looking for your child having the appropriate, first of all, that MDR has got to determine appropriately whether or not the behavior was indeed a manifestation. And so you need a teacher with more than a cursory knowledge of your child, or more than just a little bit of time spent over the course of time with your student, right? You want to make sure that counselors, trusted teachers, any coaches, if they are playing any sports or if they're a part of any teams, a teacher's aide, if a teacher's aide is working with your student, even if it isn't an aide assigned directly to your student. If there is a class in which your student has access to an aide, that aide is probably going to have some pretty good information about your student and how they act and react when they are under pressure or under stress, or when they may not understand, or whatever antecedent might lead to a behavior. You also want to make sure that you're inviting outside providers that have relevant information or specific expertise about your student. Now, again, is your student seeing a counselor or a psychologist or a therapist? Are there medical professionals that might speak to what your child is experiencing with a particular diagnosis and how that might cause actions or reactions in your student? Are you a part of a faith community and a spiritual leader, a youth pastor or some other spiritual leader who might have insights into your student? Other coaches, mentors? Does your student get homework help? You got to think of all of these folks who are spending quality time with your student and who may have knowledge, who may be able to provide insight into what can lead to a particular behavior, how to de-escalate a particular behavior, or how to avoid completely a particular behavior because of some things that they are doing that is effective in your student's life. And don't forget the value of a support person for you or for your student, right? You might just have a friend who is able to help calm you when you get a little anxious about things, or your student might have a trusted person that might be able to help them articulate when your student is in the meeting and they're wanting to share from their perspective. So don't underestimate the power of a support person. And don't underestimate the power of an advocate, whether that advocate is an attorney or not, but someone who really understands the law and is able to translate these critical components that you're bringing and sharing with the team. They are able to translate that then into how it applies to your student and how the law requires the school division to appropriately address the needs of your child. Now, you also need to make sure that your invitees are prepared. You want to make sure that they are able to present their information on behalf of your student efficiently and effectively. If you know that you have a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist and they're long-winded, you might want to help narrow it down to the very information that is relevant with regard to a particular behavior, with regard to what might trigger your student, or with regard to what might make your student shut down and just completely stop being able to access learning. But make sure that those folks, whoever they are, that they're prepared to share. Make sure that they understand the environment, because you're going to know better than anyone what the environment with your student's IEP team is like. Is it a very cordial space where everyone is open and willing to share and listen? Or might it be a little more contentious, where you're just really going to have to come and you're going to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, be prepared to defend, whatever information you bring. But whatever that environment is, you want to make sure that your attendees are ready. They're aware of what the environment is, they're aware of the information they're going to share, and they're able to do it efficiently and effectively. And then you also want to make sure that all of your invitees flow together naturally. You're telling a story. Ultimately, even in an MDR hearing, you're still telling your child's story. My child may have acted in this way, but it is absolutely a manifestation of their disability because. And you'll have those folks who have been working with your student talk about, well, I've been working with the student for this amount of time, and I have noticed that under these circumstances, this particular behavior manifests, and I'm able to then work with the student to get past those behaviors by doing this and this and this. And that might be the therapist or the counselor talking, but then here comes the coach talking about, it's interesting that you share that, because on the court, the student, escalated in this way. And mom had shared with me some tactics and some skills and some things that you had shared. And I was able to implement those things. And I also saw a de-escalation, or that particular behavior subsided. And then we have, this other trusted person, this mentor, or this person providing homework help, bringing another perspective. Yes, in the educational environment, when I am tutoring, or when I am providing other supports to the student, I have noticed this and this, and the behavior then manifests. And I am also able to use these skills. And I've also discovered this and this and this. So understand that you want to paint this beautiful, accurate picture of your student, of what precedes a behavior, what that behavior looks like, and how do you support your student to get past a particular behavior. That is the story that you want every person that you invite to be able to collectively tell. So remembering again, the information that the team must consider, it's got to be your record, the records of your students' past behavior. At home, and in other spaces where they are active, not just at school and at home, but if they are in sports, what is it like when they're playing those sports? If they are receiving homework help, if they are doing other things, does that behavior manifest? You want to look at the IEP goals. Are they addressing behavior? If they are not, should they be? Has there been a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan put into place? What is happening at the beginning before a behavior manifests? And is there an understanding of the student? Are we observing? And does the student even understand what's going on? And can they even say, hey, you know what? I'm feeling a little anxious. I feel as if this or that. And then parents, are you bringing any information about what's going on with your child? Are you bringing it so that it can also have bring to bear on what is going on during this MDR hearing? You've got to talk about any recent changes at home. And the emotional status of a student. Again, the student talking about this is going on with me, or that is going on with me, or this or that was going on with me on that particular day, right? So then, we're about to get into case scenarios. Gosh, I went through that quickly because I wanted to be sure that we had time, but I went even quicker than I intended. Oh my goodness. But I want to pause here before we head into the scenarios to ask if anyone has any questions. Are there any comments, or can I bring more clarity to anything that I have shared thus far?
And at this point, you can either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can feel free to use the chat feature. So I'm kind of watching both screens here. So whichever way you feel more comfortable, feel free to use the chat. We can both see your responses in the chat. And if not, we will move forward with the case studies to give us some time to dialogue there.
Okay. Well, we are going to start with our young person. Her name is Jane. Now, Jane is 16 years old, and she has a specific learning disability. It's been diagnosed now for 5 years. And she also has a hearing impairment that is only being diagnosed for 1 year. And she receives services through an IEP. Now, Jane's hearing impairment was because of an accident. So I just want to throw that in. Jane was suspended for 10 days in October for class disruption. And then she received a second 10-day suspension the second week of November. And it was also for class disruption. Now Jane is on her 4th day of a 5-day suspension for disrespecting authority. Now, the LEA has been made aware that Jane is working with a therapist to help her regulate her mood and behaviors because it's related to the trauma of her permanent hearing loss. which was caused by an accident. Jane has not had a functional behavioral assessment, and there are no behavioral interventions in place. So our first question is, has Jane been long-term suspended? That's the first question.
And you can feel free again to put your answers in chat. We can both see them, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you, whichever you feel most comfortable. Okay, I see the answers starting to come.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. Jane has been long-term suspended. She absolutely has. See, because there is a definite pattern that's related in behavior, and it's reasonably close. And we're at a total of 25 days at this point, which is well over the threshold of those 11 days. So now Jane's parent has requested a manifestation determination review hearing to address the more than 10-day suspension. And the school has responded with a phone call to explain that Jane has not been suspended beyond the 10 days, and they are refusing to schedule an MDR hearing. What should the parents' next steps be? What should the parents do at this point?
Again, you can utilize chat, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you.
So realizing here Jane is, she has been suspended. Let's see, what do we have here? That's right. A phone call is not okay. That's right. And collect all the documentation about Jane. So first of all, you're right. A phone call is absolutely not okay. So what is the parent going to request instead?
Someone said an IEP meeting.
Okay. Yes, you can absolutely request an IEP meeting. But you want their decision to refuse to schedule that MDR hearing in writing in the form of a prior written notice. Remember, that prior written notice, that's a power tool. It really is. It's a way to document what you have asked for and what the school has refused. Let's see, I want to see. So what else might the parent do? It absolutely call for an IEP meeting, but what else? Any ideas?
Again, feel free to use the chat, or we can unmute you if you'd like.
And what I want to share with you all is I am using a scenario that I have actually experienced. So this isn't just off the top of my head. Oh, you absolutely should request a functional behavioral assessment. Absolutely. And yes, you might even say, hey, I need an advocate. You're absolutely right, because I was called in at this point. And what we did was we sent a demand letter to the school. And what can you imagine was in that demand letter? What do you think we said to the school division about, hold on, you have now suspended this child for over 20 days. Can they do the FBA before the meeting? That would be something to ask. So I'm just going to kind of, the chain of events, including the antecedents and reactions that have occurred. You want to write out, my daughter experienced a traumatic loss of hearing. What kind of accommodation has the school provided to Jane? Yes, you want to ask that question in this letter. You want to say, so my daughter has experienced this, and now she's exhibiting these behaviors. And you want to reiterate that Jane has been suspended for a pattern of removals totaling 20 days for the single offense of disrespecting authority. You want to bring that bright and bold up front, right? It's disrespecting authority twice. And each time you've suspended her for 10 days, that's 20, and you have not done a functional behavioral assessment. Jane has been deprived of FAPE. Why is that? Why is it that we're able to make the claim that Jane has been deprived of FAPE?
You can feel free to use the chat again or raise your hand.
We're able to say that Jane has been deprived of FAPE because she has been removed from her learning environment for 20 days. We're coming up nigh a month. She's about to be at 25 days, and the school division isn't doing anything about it. Matter of fact, they're telling the parents that, it has not been. She has not had a pattern of removal that would require a manifestation determination review. So how many times might the school just go ahead and suspend her? And so Jane has been deprived of the requisite manifestation determination review to determine if her behavior is a manifestation of her disability. So those are the things that, and there's one other thing. We told the school division that we are preparing to file a due process hearing unless the school complies with IDEA and Section 504, because that is a parent's recourse. You attempt to solve the issue with the school, but if they put their foot down and flat out refuse, you have to let them know, I have a course of action beyond your no. Number one, you're going to put your no in writing. And then number two, I have recourse. And do you know why you spend the time to write all of this out in that demand letter? Who can think of the reason that you would want to make sure that that demand letter covers all of this information?
Again,
I'm just going to.
You can feel free to use the chat or raise your hand. I'm monitoring both.
These are the ways to get the information in the record. You've got to make sure that you have, again, remember, you have invited the folks who are able to help you tell the story of your student. You even have folks inside the school. That's right. Build your case. That's exactly right. That's why you are building your case. And you see, when you get before a hearing officer, you want to be able to say, you know what, on this day, the school was on notice that this was going on with my child. On this day, we shared that these are the ways that we are able to support my child and to keep behaviors from happening. And in this time period, those very behaviors that we attempted to put the school on notice and to provide information to put so that the school was able to put the appropriate supports in place, we attempted to do that during this time period. And then the school division refused to put those in place. And now my child has begun to exhibit those behaviors. The school has now suspended her, my student, for these 20 days, and she is now even serving another 5 days. And the school is refusing to hold their responsibility, to uphold their responsibility by providing my student with this manifestation determination review. They have refused to provide my student with that functional behavioral assessment so that those behavioral interventions can be put into place. You want to be able to tell that story with the record, not because you've said it, but because you can literally point to the record and point out that these deficiencies have happened, and it has deprived your student of their access to a free and appropriate education. Let's see. So the LEA, as soon as you said due process, they got a little nervous and they said, okay, we're going to go ahead and convene this MDR hearing. And you've received the meeting notice, and the school has invited Jane's PE teacher, the assistant principal for students with the last name A through L. Jane's last name is Sorensen. There's a new psychologist who has had minimal interaction with Jane, who has also been invited, along with the head of special education services, who will represent the school division during the hearing. So, who would you invite? So you see their list of invitees. Who is it that you now would invite? Who do you want to add to that list of invitees?
Again, you can feel free to use chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you.
So they've invited the principal, assistant principal who is right, the appropriate principal, teachers that work closely with Jane. That's right. That's right. Who else? You know, and think beyond just the school building. That's right. Other parents, private coach. Yes. Outside therapists that work with Jane. That's right. And anyone else in the community who is close to her. That's right. It's going to be so important to invite all of these, the doctor. Yes, that's going to be so important because Jane is suffering trauma. It's only been a year that she has experienced permanent hearing loss. What is Jane going through? You know, now we as parents may not even fully understand, but the therapists working with her, she was already diagnosed with a specific learning disability, and now she has lost another faculty that would give her access to learning in the way that she had known, right? And so what all is Jane going through? It is going to be those outside providers that are working with her and helping her to access this new world, right? Because now if she is no longer hearing, she's got to learn to read lips. She's got to learn a new language, sign language, right? There is a lot going on with Jane. And so this idea that we've got these folks with such minimal contact with her, such minimal understanding of who she was even prior to this hearing loss. It's a disservice to her to have many of these folks sitting around a table attempting to determine whether or not her behavior was a manifestation of her disability. It is a disservice, and it's disrespectful, in my opinion, to the parent to attempt to bring together these folks to have this meeting, and they're going to make a determination about this student when they have very minimal, if any, interaction with her. So who should we invite? The homeroom teacher, that person that has been working with Jane over the course of this year, guidance counselor with 2 years experience supporting Jane. Now, I'm getting a little, I shared with you that this was an actual case. And so I guess that was just a little telling of such. The assistant principal for the students with M through Z last names, the common sense approach, the therapist that's been working with Jane since her hearing loss occurred, right? We want the tutor that's helping her learn sign language, youth development professionals that are also working with Jane. I can share that her parents, they put an entire team around her to help her deal with this new world that she is engaging. And so, again, the ultimate question, was the behavior caused by or directly and substantially related to the student's disability? These are the determinations that the school division is going to have to make, that team is going to have to make. Does the students, whether the student had a significant ability that may result in impaired judgment or reasoning? That's an easy answer, in my opinion. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. We know that she has now had this traumatic experience, and that has been stacked on top of her specific learning disability. And so her ability to process and deal with all of this on top of engaging this educational environment, stress. As adults, how would we deal, right? And then we've also got to determine, is there a neurological impairment, a medical condition? The student has shown a history of voluntary control of the behavior in question. Now, that particular question, that was most interesting because the student's ability to voluntarily control a behavior when there has been now a new stressor added, that question, I'm not sure if it could be asked, right? Are we going to ask whether or not there has been a voluntary ability to control that behavior with this new impeding factor, right? And then, is the student in an escalated state? Do they remember what was going on? And is the student able to perform whatever is needed? Are they able to regulate themselves in this particular situation? Well, and then the other question, of course, is, was it the LEA's failure to implement appropriately the student's IEP? So, was the student deriving reasonable educational benefit? Were the student's needs addressed in the IEP? Were there positive behavioral supports in place? Was there progress monitoring data, both academic and behavioral? And were the necessary resources available to the student as a part of their program? And what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to pause right there to just share with you Jane's case. And of course, that's not the student's name, but in Jane's case, they had not put the appropriate supports in place. And they attempted to say that it was not, they nevertheless attempted to say, no, it was not a manifestation of her disability. And no, the school did not fail to appropriately implement Jane's IEP. And we did have to take it further. We did work with the Office of Dispute Resolution to resolve the issue. And before we ended up in due process, the Office of Dispute Resolution did say to the LEA, hey, you might want to review this documentation, review this record, because there's a clear pattern that the student needed support and did not receive support. There was no functional behavioral assessment done even after this traumatic event. And you have not put new behavioral interventions in place to support this student who has not just experienced this traumatic event, but who is now compounded learning challenges. And so until you have met your obligation, surely you would not want to proceed with attempting to say that this student, that this was not a manifestation of the student's disability. So that was the outcome of Jane's story. But again, remember, there are indeed two potential outcomes. The school is either going to say yes, or the team is either going to agree that yes, it was a manifestation of either the school's failure to appropriately implement the IEP, or it was a manifestation of the student's disability, or they're going to attempt to say no. And if indeed the answer is no, then the school division can move forward with disciplining that student in the same way they would a non-disabled peer. The caveat is of course, if it's more than 10 days, they're still going to have to provide the services that are in a student's IEP. So, and I've gotten ahead of myself once again, if the behavior is a manifestation, then there's going to be that functional behavioral assessment and the development of a BIP, and then no further disciplinary action can be taken. Remember, we talked about the big three yesterday. We talked about weapons, we talked about drugs, and we talked about serious bodily injury. We're not going to go back down that road again tonight, but I did want to mention those three because they are the caveat to this. Even if the behavior is a manifestation, the school division does have the right in those three instances to remove your student into an alternative educational placement for no more than 45 days. But if the behavior is not determined to be a manifestation, then again, the school can proceed with disciplinary action. You can short-term remove the student and no provision of services. The long-term removal, but the educational services have got to be consistent with that student's IEP. I wanted to stop here. But let me see, it's got to be consistent with the student's IEP or their 504 plan. And then the LEA must also conduct that functional behavioral assessment and develop that behavioral intervention plan. So realize that when behavior has manifested, that obligation for that functional behavioral assessment and that behavior intervention plan, it attaches no matter the outcome of a manifestation determination review. And so when we go back to the beginning of Jane's story, and she had exhibited behavior in that first 10-day happened, they had the obligation right there to conduct that functional behavioral assessment. And so they were out of compliance at that point. And that was something that the Office of Dispute Resolution pointed out, that, hey, be aware of those stressor points, right? Be aware of when the school is obligated to do a thing. Be aware when, and make sure that you have everything in writing. But even if there is a behavioral intervention plan in place, it's got to be reevaluated for effectiveness. If we are still experiencing behaviors, if we are still attempting to create the environment where the student is able to access learning or prevent the student's behavior from impeding access to learning for other students, and if we haven't gotten there yet, we've got to continue to look at the ways that we are supporting the student and continue to add in supports until we do find the right balance. So again, if you do not agree with the outcome of the MDR, an expedited due process is the way to go. Understand that the LEA, they have got to get on it, and within 10 days, they've got to make sure that you are moving towards that expedited due process hearing. Let's see, and the reasons that you can request that MDR, it's because you don't agree with the MDR. You are disputing that even that removal for 45 days for one of the big three, you can request a due process hearing to challenge that. And let's see, you can also have the LEA, the school division, they can also request a hearing. So let's say that you challenge that 45-day removal and you're successful, then the school division has the right to appeal that. Or let's say that you're in a dispute as to whether or not, and the one that usually causes the most trouble is that serious bodily injury. And the school division is attempting to say that your student's behavior rises to the level of serious bodily injury, and they're trying to say that it's dangerous for your student to remain in their current educational placement during a stay put. That's another time that the LEA might be the one to request an expedited due process hearing. So again, the significance of all the work that you put into preparing for the MDR. You've got to recreate that solid record, as one of you have already said. And that solid record is going to reflect your student needs. It's going to demonstrate the school division's responsiveness to meeting those needs through the IEP or the 504 plan. And it's also going to reflect any inadequacies inadequacies in the appropriate provision of supports and services. And it sets you up for due process if necessary. So remember, we just had a solid record. And when we contacted the Office of Dispute Resolution, they of course got with the school because they give you that little period before a due process begins where they're hoping that resolution will happen, that resolution period, right? And they notified the school division to let them know, this isn't looking good for you here. You've really dropped the ball in some really important places. It was the solid record that was able to reflect that. That's why you want to take the time, you want to do the work of creating and maintaining a solid record of what goes on with your child. You've got to read and thoroughly read before you sign anything that they send home to you. I've seen some really interesting prior written notices that it doesn't really say what the school division agreed to do or disagreed and refused to do. And, there's some creative language, not in Jane's case, but I've seen some really creative language to kind of skirt around what they did or didn't do, almost as if they knew, well, if I put this in writing and it comes back to backfire on me later, I don't want this to be the thing that would point. This can't be my smoking gun, right? And so you read and you review and you make sure that a prior written notice is reflective of what you've asked for. And when the school division has refused to provide whatever service or whatever support it is, that it is documented, that they say why they are refusing to provide, what they are attempting to do instead. And you want to go back after 2 months, 3 months, quarterly to say, I need to review the progress or the lack thereof. Now, I requested this, and I know that it works because we're using it in other environments where my student is, and you have refused it. And now here we are 3-4 months down the line, and my student is continuing to struggle. You want to be able to point to those things in the record. You want to be able to write that note that says, or send that email that says, on such and such a date, I asked for this. After this amount of time, my student has not made progress. You are now attempting to, long-term remove my child. And had we done this thing that I shared with you that is already demonstrating effective in other environments, we would not be in this place. Or had your alternatives had been such that I could have agreed with, that other therapists and others providing services to my student could have agreed with, then we would not find ourselves in this place now. Your record should be that tight. It should be that thorough. And it should tell the story that succinctly. And you ought to then be able to bring in all of those supports that have from those other environments to validate exactly what you have been saying to the school division. So just one last thing to remember, the purpose of your advocacy is not to allow your student to get away with challenging behaviors. It's to ensure that the appropriate supports are in place, so that your student is successful, so that your student is able to access learning, and so that they are indeed being provided the free and appropriate public education that the law guarantees them. And it's also to ensure that the local education agency, the school division, it's to put them on notice and to let them know that they are indeed obligated to provide the supports such that your student is able to access that FAPE. So just in conclusion, it starts with a behavior. And then there's notice. You are putting the school on notice. The school is putting you on notice. But ultimately, the school division has got to listen to you as the expert, the premier expert when it comes to your child. That's going to be you and your child. And then you've got to make sure that your record, that your student's record, it's tight. You know what's in it. You have been diligent in keeping it up to date. If you have a student and you know that there are challenging behaviors, you need to be sure that you are on top of their student educational record, and it is reflective of everything that you have done, everything that outside providers have done, and everything that the school division has done or has not done. You want to make sure that you have those attendees that are going to be able to bring the relevant information in and to bear on this MDR hearing. And you want to make sure that you have prepared yourself and the attendees. You want to make sure that you're able to open the story. You're able to tell about your student. You're able to humanize your student and bring them past this moment and this behavior. And then you're going to make sure that all of these other attendees, that they are bolstering that story and enriching it with all of the ways in which they are able to support your student successfully, and the things that they are doing to make that so. And then, of course, you allow even the school division participants, you allow them to talk about their experiences with your child and whether they have had successes or not. But what you don't ever want to do is leave it to the school division to paint the picture of your child and you sit defending it. That's not how an MDR should ever go. You have the paint, you paint the strokes, you've got the brush in your hand. And you ensure that you have everyone necessary to ensure that that picture is painted appropriately. And you've got to be prepared to defend your students' right in a due process hearing if necessary. And again, if you've done your homework, if you have made sure that that record is tight, it might not even get to due process. You might just have those folks in the Office of Dispute Resolution coming to your aid and putting the school division on notice that this isn't the one you want to mess with here, because it's quite clear what needs to be done for this student. And it's quite clear that you need to get on board and do that. And then, of course, after that, there is that final placement determination. But again, if you've done your homework and you've done it well, that final placement determination should be in your student's regular educational setting. And finally, who can you call if you need help? The Virginia Department of Education. And again, the Office of Dispute Resolution, right? The U.S. Department of Education. And there you want the Office of Civil Rights. And again, I want to lift up the Disability Law Center of Virginia. They are excellent, excellent, excellent partners if you are ever in need of someone to support you. And I also just want to share my contact information, and I want to say thank you.